Regime change by jazz improvisation. That is how the respected scholar of Iran, Karim Sajdapur, described the Trump administration's strategy in the war it has initiated with Iran. Sadly, it's the most accurate description of the scattered, shifting, and uncertain approach that emanates from Washington these days. The president launched this war exhorting the Iranian people to overthrow their government.
It will be yours to take.
Perhaps he had assumed that the regime would collapse instantly. But when it didn't, in a day or two, he changed course. He began musing about dealing with potential leaders within the regime and praising the U.S. intervention in Venezuela as the model to be followed. Perfect, quote unquote. Precisely because far from regime change, it only involved the arrest of 2 people. Pete Hegseth specifically denied that this was a regime change war, as did his senior aide Abrish Kobi. Both said the goal was merely to degrade Iran's military forces, many of which had been, quote-unquote, obliterated last June in a 12-day bombing attack that included the use of stealth bombers. But then in a new twist, Trump reached out to Kurdish leaders in Iran and Iraq, promising them support if they would join the fight, presumably not to degrade Iran's military power, but to topple the government in Tehran, maybe even change Iran's borders. This weekend, however, the president backpedaled on this plan. Trump has also now proclaimed that there won't be a deal without unconditional surrender from Iran. So the goal isn't regime change, except when it is. The most dangerous element of this war, however, is not that the lead actor is improvising like a saxophone player. It is that the 2 countries waging the war have separate and perhaps incompatible agendas. For Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, the war is clearly about destroying the Islamic Republic. In a video he released, he acknowledged that this war was the culmination of a 40-year-old dream. Israel's military strategy has been focused, brilliantly implemented, and aligned with their goal. The Israeli strikes are decapitating Iran's leadership, destroying its military forces, striking its leadership compounds, even hitting police facilities. It is, as the Wall Street Journal reported, methodically destroying Iran's police state, leaving the regime right.
That is the man who sat in the Situation Room for 4 years as Biden's national security advisor. He has read the briefings. He knows what a war plan looks like, and he just told you, or on camera, that this one does not have a clear objective. A dozen different explanations, shifting by the hour, by the day, 1 week into a war, and nobody in Washington can tell you what winning looks like. But here's the part the news cameras keep missing. America and Israel are not fighting the same war. They are using the same bombs and the same airspace, but they do not want the same outcome. Israel's goal is the destruction of the Islamic Republic. Full stop. Netanyahu said it himself. This war is the culmination of a 40-year dream. Every Israeli strike is deliberate, focused, coordinated. They are decapitating Iran's leadership, destroying military command structures, hitting police facilities, methodically dismantling the machinery of the Iranian state so that when the regime finally falls, there is nothing left to hold the country together. That is the plan. That is Israel's plan. And America has no idea that is the plan it is funding. Because when a regime collapses and nothing holds the country together, that is not liberation. That is not democracy. That is Syria. That is Libya. That is Iraq. That is a civil war that lasts a decade and produces millions of refugees and hundreds of thousands of dead. Iran has 90 million people. Its Revolutionary Guard alone is 200,000 strong. Its paramilitary forces add hundreds of thousands more. Its regular army is 400,000. When the regime falls, and Israel is making sure it falls, those soldiers do not disappear. They did not disappear in Iraq. Saddam's army melted away and came back as an insurgency that cost America another decade and thousands more lives. The same thing is coming in Iran, and the Trump administration stumbled into it because the plan was 2 or 3 weeks. Snap fingers, new government. There is no new government. There is only the vacuum.
For a collapse. And on the current trajectory, Israel might well succeed in its objective. And that will likely result in a power vacuum in the country, which could invite revolt, but will almost certainly result in a civil war. Keep in mind, whoever makes Sikh power, this regime will fight back. The appropriate analogy here is Syria, a country that was mired in a civil war for more than a decade, with hundreds of thousands dead and millions of refugees. Iran is a country that could easily explode, as Tom Friedman has written. It's filled with ethnic groups, Kurds, Armenians, Azeris, with ties to neighboring countries. They've lived peaceably together, but as history demonstrates from the Balkans to Iraq, when order collapses and a power vacuum develops, people retreat to their tribal groups and lose trust in others. And that's how a civil war begins. What would fuel this war is the fact that Iran's government has a vast cadre of dedicated soldiers, armed to the teeth, who will fight against any new government or group. Its Revolutionary Guard is estimated to be almost 200,000 people strong, with an additional paramilitary force, the Basij, of several hundreds of thousands. And then there's the regular armed forces, which is around 400,000. Just as Saddam Hussein's army melted away after the American invasion, and then much of it reappeared as an insurgency, so too one could imagine the IRGC fighting in different garbs to deny any new government the ability to control the country. In Libya, more than 14 years after Gaddafi fell, there is still no one group that controls the entire country. It's much easier to destroy a state than to rebuild one. For Israel, this is an acceptable outcome. It rids the country of its greatest foe, and if that produces chaos in Iran, so be it. The Syrian civil war actually improved Israel's security because it did not face a major Arab state dedicated to fighting it anymore. But an Iranian civil war is not in America's interests, and it's not in the interests of America's closest Arab allies, who depend on the region being stable and predictable so that oil, goods, money, and people can flow freely and easily through it. Washington needs to find a way to ensure that it secures the gains it has made in this war, a disarmed and defanged Iran, but without pushing the country into civil war. There are still ways to bolster the achievements and close out this war. As usual, Qatar could play a useful role as an intermediary. But time is running out. At some point, this war will reach a tipping point, and no one will be able to control the spillover. Let's get straight to it with Jake Sullivan. He was one of the key negotiators of the Obama administration's nuclear deal with Iran in 2015 that Trump pulled out of. More recently, he served as President Biden's national security advisor. He is also the co-host of a terrific new podcast called The Long Game. Jake, welcome. When you look at the situation right now, put yourself back in the White House, in the Situation Room, what are you seeing that encourages you, or what are you seeing that worries you?
Well, look, Fareed, on the encouraging side, the U.S. military is just simply remarkable. It's remarkable at being able to achieve tactical objectives, to execute operations with skill, professionalism, and courage. And that has been proven out here over the course of the past week. But the discouraging part is we are asking the U.S. military to put itself in harm's way, and we've already lost 6 service members, pointed towards a completely unclear objective. The administration has not been able to say with any clarity whatsoever what the ultimate goal of this war is. And in fact, they've given perhaps a dozen different explanations, shifting by the hour, by the day. And here, a week into the war, to have that level of muddiness, that muddle, I think is a huge challenge, because it suggests that this war got launched without being fully thought through, and that the end of this war is something that we have no kind of core concept as to what it will bring, or how the president will ultimately come out and say, okay, I'm done, I'm moving on. And that leaves us in an extremely precarious position.
It really has widened in a way that frankly is greater than I would have guessed. The Iranians these are pinprick.
Regime survival. That is what Iran is fighting for. Not ideology, not territory, survival. And when a country is fighting for survival, it does not negotiate. It does not back down. It hits everything it can reach: oil flows, shipping lanes, energy infrastructure, and it makes the entire world pay until the war becomes too expensive to continue. It is already working. Gas prices jumped in 1 week. the largest disruption to oil production and transport in recorded history. Those are not my words, that is what energy analysts are reporting. And this was predictable. Jake Sullivan said it clearly. If you launch an existential war against Iran, do not be surprised when they respond existentially. But Trump was surprised because the plan, the actual plan, was that Iran would fold. 2 weeks of bombing and they would hand over their nuclear program, accept a new American-approved government, and thank Washington for the regime change. That is not a strategy. That is a fantasy. And now the United States is 1 week into a war with no exit, no objective, no plan for the day after, a military losing service members by the week, a Middle East being pushed toward the largest regional catastrophe in modern history, and the president is calling it a great thing. Iran has 40 million more people than Iraq had. Its military is larger, better armed, and fighting on home soil. Its paramilitary forces will not surrender. They will scatter, regroup, and fight for years. And somewhere in Washington right now, someone is drawing up plans for ground troops. Because that is where jazz improvisation ends, and the next forever war begins.